Hello and welcome to this session on how to use internal APIs to help your Salesforce org scale. My name is Paul Batterson, I'm your speaker today. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and everywhere else you want to as @pbatterson. I'm the CEO and founder of Groundwork Apps, who is an ISV partner that creates simple to use apps on the Salesforce platform. I'm also a Salesforce MVP Hall of Fame member and was a Salesforce MVP for 9 years. You may also have seen me around as the author of a couple of books on Apex, one which is in the middle here, Learning Salesforce Development with Apex, Mastering Apex Programming, the second edition for which is coming out in the next few months, and also the Astronomical Apex Testing course that's available on Udemy. So all of those are there. If you want to find out more, you can visit Amazon or the relevant places, or just message me afterwards on the channel that I mentioned. So what are we talking about today? Today we're going to be focusing on how we can use internal APIs, what they are, and how they can help us scale and grow our org and structure it in a slightly more efficient manner as our utilization of Salesforce grows. So we're going to start off by talking about the story of a Salesforce org or a Salesforce deployment. Whenever I use the term org here, think not just a single Salesforce org as you would recognize it, like production or sandbox, but perhaps think more broadly about your landscape and ecosystem of your organization. So I'm going to be using the term a little bit interchangeably here, but it'll make sense. What an internal API is, we're going to discuss what is an internal API, how we can use one, and the benefits of having internal APIs and using them. Before we then move on to talk about the types of API and the types of internal API we can build, talking a little about the technology there of how we implement them. We're then going to discuss how we can segregate an org to build it out into different areas and different domains so that makes sense to help us define and build our APIs. Talk through an example of how I've done this with an organization before and how we kind of restructured their environment. We're going to talk a little bit about scale and performance as well there before wrapping up with some final thoughts about how you might go about doing this in your own environment. So hopefully that sounds interesting, and we'll cover all these bits and pieces off now. So let's start by talking about the story of a Salesforce environment. Typically, companies start off by buying a single Salesforce product, and the most common one that organizations have bought and keep on buying is Sales Cloud. So they want to start doing some sort of CRM, some customer relationship management work, so they buy Sales Cloud, and after a while they've got a lot of customers, thankfully, from using Sales Cloud, and they decide to get Service Cloud as well, another customer service component. So they also like to take cases, respond to them, and look after their customers, maybe doing some asset management, things like that. And in service here, we can also have things like field service and other service aspects to it. They might then build some apps on the platform, some custom apps that they like to work with. Salesforce is a very robust and flexible platform, and so you'll start to see other applications be built out by the organization and company as they start to grow their use and as they get more people comfortable in there and more data within Salesforce. And they might even add on an experience as well, or a community, which allows external parties that work with the company to come in to the Salesforce environment. So it could be a customer community where they're allowing people to manage their accounts or self-service. It could be a partner community where they're working with their partner accounts to bring in those people to work with them more closely. And it also could be just an employee community, so it replaces kind of employee portals and pieces like that where you can collaborate together as employees. They might add a marketing system as well, so Marketing Cloud, Pardot, Campaign Monitor, any other marketing tool they want to start sending emails, to start doing marketing, advertising, profiling, and reaching out to individuals and organizations, depending on their B2B or B2C a little bit more. They'll probably have some external databases they'll then start to add in, because suddenly some of the data that's in these databases, it might be a pricing engine, it might be a PIM, a product management tool, it might be an ERP system, but somehow they're going to need to connect this together. Some organizations, if they're a B2C, they'll probably already have a website on there and a web store that they'll be using that needs integrating. If they're B2B, they might start to look to open a web store to allow them to open up that new sales channel. And then they'll probably want to do something with analytics as well through Tableau, because once you've got all of these systems together, the iconography here is very much using the Salesforce iconography. Don't have to be Salesforce products, but you'll want to do some analytics, bringing that all together. And this all seems pretty logical and sensible and straightforward, but the problem we've now got is all these different systems that we want to start integrating together to make work together and interact properly. And this is where the complexity really starts to come in, because by itself, Sales Cloud is a fairly simple tool. Things come in as a lead, they work through, they become an account, contact, or a person account, and an opportunity that gets closed. And that's really it. There's kind of products, so you've got product management, you've got quotes, you might have a few other bits and pieces in there, but it's still quite a simplistic tool. You can add in things like CPQ and other sales processes on there, but still fundamentally, it's quite a simple, well understood process. And all of these applications themselves are fairly quick and easy to use in their native format, but it's when you start to move data between them to have interactions that occur and actually drive things forward that complexity gets added in. Now, we might think this is quite easy for us though, because we've got this lot of stuff at the top that's all on the platform. And when I say the platform here, I mean kind of the native platform, on a single Salesforce instance rather than something like Marketing Cloud, which is on a separate tech stack. And so, it's all kind of in the one UI, has a shared underlying database. So, it's quite easy to integrate them. But you'll want to add in some other integrations. So, for example, we want to make sure that our marketing and our CRM can chat to each other. We might have some data from our database that needs to be used. We might have web store that's using items or pushing and pulling items. We might have a web store, for example, that creates an order. That order then needs to go in and become a closed one opportunity, create an account, create a contact, register a user, etc., etc. We'll have our analytics that just wants data from everywhere, and some of these pieces all talk to each other. So might have our marketing system talk to our web store to do an abandoned cart journey, or our database here needs to send data into the data warehouse and into our analytics tool. And this is where super complex things can occur, because we've got lots and lots of point-to-point integrations here, and it becomes very difficult to manage, to maintain, and to scale. And there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can start to think about just sticking MuleSoft in the middle, and MuleSoft being a connector in between these things for it to all connect to. So Marketing Cloud and the data point and your web e-commerce store and your analytics tool and your platform all connect via MuleSoft. But what are they connecting with? How are they connecting via MuleSoft, and how do we define how those connections work? And that's really the fundamental kind of question here, and kind of concept we want to think about is, when we talk about an internal API, we're less thinking about a particular technology, although we'll talk about technology in a minute, whether it's REST or SOAP or whatever. What we're really thinking about is, what data are we wanting to get, and how are we wanting to use that data to define our API and how our processes fit together? And that's what an internal API is. So an internal API is an API designed to be called or used by internally controlled applications, not your customers and not your partners. So if you think about, for example, let's take a company like Netflix. Okay, Netflix got hundreds of APIs, thousands of APIs. They may have some that are externally available if you want to kind of retrieve a list of movies that someone's watched for a recommendation engine. Amazon similarly have lots of APIs that are available for kind of getting book information or book recommendations down. But they also have a bunch of internal APIs that are not available to any customers or partners to use for things like billing and invoicing and user management. And what these internal APIs do is they allow the various parts of your business to talk to each other and work together. And what they can help you do is help you define canonical data models and processes. Now, a canonical data model is a way of thinking about the organization as a whole with a fixed data structure. When I say a fixed data structure here, what I mean is that you remove the concept of a data entity that is tied to a specific system. So, for example, the idea of a customer. You stop thinking about a customer as an account and a contact or an account, and you start to think of a customer as what data attributes does it have that are key to that customer in every system. So it must have a name, it must have an account number, it must have a serial code or unique account reference and things like that. And you define that canonical data model across the entire organization, so it allows you to share data in between systems much more freely and readily, and from an analytics perspective, understand more detail about who these different kind of data entities are and what they're doing. And similarly, it helps you define your processes. So what we want with an internal API is to help us understand how our processes are flowing end to end, so that when we get to the end of a process, we can hand over to another process. And it might be another business domain that we're working in, it might be another functional area, it might be another functional set within our business domain or process within our business domain. But what we want to do is we want to think about how we can separate our environment so that we can come up with these small modules of understanding and work and kind of functionality that can talk to each other via these internal APIs that make it quick and easy for everything to work together, but abstract away some of the difficulties. Now, there are different typology we can use to undertake this, and different types of internal API we can have. We can have REST-based internal APIs. And so these are using the REST protocol, so standard HTTP verbs, really good for web-based integration. So if you have some data on an external system and it needs to be called in via a Lightning Web Component, that's a really good REST API. Or if your e-commerce system is talking to your CRM system, REST APIs are very good there for kind of allowing that to happen on a web UI. We can have SOAP UIs. So if you have SOAP APIs even, sorry. SOAP UI is a testing tool. SOAP APIs, pardon me, which are very well defined, very strongly typed, and are really good for these system-to-system integrations where performance and bandwidth and all these other problems aren't really a problem. So if you think about your ERP system talking to the Salesforce platform, that doesn't need to happen in real time. It doesn't need to happen necessarily in a manner where you're sending the smallest data load across the network. It's probably two cloud servers talking to each other where they have good bandwidth, so there's less likely to be an issue with like someone on a 3G connection or something still. And so they're very, very good for those sorts of integrations. You can have event-based integrations, so where you send a small event payload, and small here is in air quotes. You send a payload that any system can subscribe to. So you publish an event payload, any of the systems you want can subscribe to it and then act based upon that payload. And this is really kind of event and action driven. So you can think about things such as an opportunity closing. We'll talk about this as a really good example later on, but an opportunity closing is an event where there are many, many downstream actions and interactions that will occur. And so we want to be able to do that to integrate, and that's one of our internal APIs. It's a well-defined, structured setup. And this is really good for distributed or segregated processes. So where we have a process that is easily kind of split. So, again, the end of an opportunity, when an opportunity becomes close won, it's the end of the sales lifecycle for that opportunity. Other things may occur afterwards that are customer service or finance or billing or operations or all these things, but that's an event that we can mark down from on the sales side. And so is a good way of thinking about segregating in an event-based environment. The two other types of API we can add, though, that are often kind of forgotten about are firstly an Apex API. We, as Apex developers, can build Apex APIs that provide methods for use in other Apex code. And these can be as an ISV, so Groundwork apps, we have an application that sends SMS messages, and that we have an Apex API for. And that means that any developer can simply call one of our methods, call our API. We've abstracted away the complexity of sending a text message and you're calling out to the system, checking it, retrieving the response, handling that and all these other pieces, and it's very easy to use. And similarly, if you're developing an internal system, either as packages or just through kind of a soft segregation, you can provide your own internal APIs as well for different business domains and different functional areas to work with. The other area is invocable actions. These are a type of API. An invocable action provides a very strict contract for a flow to call that will perform an action. And this allows us to integrate with admins. So again, the messaging app, the Center for Salesforce that Groundwork apps provides, has an invocable action API so that admins and declarative developers can quickly call those, and it abstracts away all the processing in the background and makes it easy to call. So these are the different types of API we can define and work with as internal APIs. And I now want to talk about how you go about segregating an environment to start doing that. So the first real area you want to look at is business function or product. And product here can be Salesforce product, can be software product. It likely aligns with some business function, although in the term of Salesforce, often there's a bit of a broad covering of many things. But you can see here in our image on the left, for example, we've split by sales, customer success, and finance in this example picture. Once you start to split by business domain, you can then split at a second level by process. And these processes should be well defined and scoped and have a clear kind of start point, end point, and handover. So looking at these, lead management. a lead comes in, that's when the process starts, it is nurtured and worked on, and it will stop being a lead and become an opportunity at some point, and that's the end of it. And it is clearly defined and scoped as to when it goes from being a lead to when it goes to being an opportunity. Same with opportunity management. It becomes an opportunity, you work it, and the opportunity ends up either closed won or closed lost. And at that point, it's no longer an opportunity, it is some closed work. And so some other process starts, likely customer onboarding. Now, our sales function has dealt with certain things, our sales domain, and so we could have teams that deal with these items in our sales domain, but we can have an API that says our opportunity is now closed, be that an event, or it can even call out across via an Apex API if we want to do to our customer success to start onboarding. And our onboarding process then goes away and designate the product. It might create an asset or do whatever it needs to do, send some emails, etc., etc. We have customer support there as well under customer success. And then in our finance, for example, we have billing and payroll, which are two other areas. So billing, sending out invoicing to customers, making sure the customers are paying, and payroll is paying our own internal people. And so by starting to think about this, we can really start to separate down by our processes, and we can go down further levels if we want to. So for billing, for example, we might have invoice-based billing versus just getting a direct debit or subscription-based billing. For payroll, we will have different payroll options in there. All sorts of things like that can go on there. But the key thing we need to ask here is, what does each process need to know, and when does it need to know so? And that'll help us define what our internal API should be doing and what type of API from the previous slide we should use, whether it should be REST, SOAP, Apex, etc., etc. So I want to talk through an example in customer, example environment, and some example kind of APIs that we built out. So that slide. Each of these separate dark blue boxes was turned into a different process, and some of them were turned into packages where they had their own teams, such as the web store. Some of them billing, for example, fairly big ones. Some of them were their own applications like employee management and identity management, and some were just different processes within the same application that were kind of managed independently, like lead management and opportunity management. But the big benefit here was we worked with this organization to define different teams for each domain. So there was a marketing development team and a sales software development team, a customer success software development team, and so on and so forth. And within those teams, there were then separate sub-teams sometimes that were responsible for different things. So in the sales area, for example, there was a portion of that software development team that was focused on the e-commerce platform and the e-commerce platform only. And there was a portion of that team that focused on lead and opportunity management. That was on Salesforce. And what it meant was that you could really rapidly update and innovate on those different areas rather than having to just kind of wait for something else to go on. So if you have an application, so let's say that the, for example here, the employee management application was slower and harder to develop than lead management and opportunity management. Well, you could go away and update the sales processes and quickly develop them whilst the employee management stuff was still working on, and it didn't block the pipeline. And so it allowed you to innovate at a different pace. So it also meant that you could kind of start building with only the API defined, making it much easier to interface and interact with. So it allowed for improvements in development performance and different teams able to scale and work together in a more coordinated manner. So I just want to finish up by talking to you about a couple of final thoughts I've got about how you can start doing this. So the first thing to do is to review the structure of your org and its processes. So how is your org set up? How is it structured? How are you processing data within your org? And how are your business processes put together? Then start to think about what business domains make sense for you. I recommend business domains as a starting point here. How do you separate your environment into different business domains? And then from there, what does each process need to know? What are the processes within that domain? What do they need to do? And where are the clear handovers? Once you then define that, it's going to be much, much easier for you to start working through things. And you can start to define how your API is going to work and look. And the big thing to be aware of is not to fear kind of asynchronous or events. And one of the big kind of mental shifts that this customer had to get over at the time when we were working on this was the idea that everything happens to happen immediately. So say the creation of a community user. Well, once that opportunity was closed, we have to have the customer's community user created. We have to have that done. And it's like, well, do we? Could that be done in a just-in-time manner when the customer first signs in? Well, that was kind of the long-term solution that we were working towards. But they wanted every customer to have a welcome email sent where they could go in and they could see a pack of installation information. So we were doing that. But there's a login email sent for that to create your user and set your password. And as it's an email, it's very much dependent upon when the email comes through to you as to when you actually receive it or not. So that was a big thing for them, because an email might just take 10 minutes to come through here because your email server's slow, or because you're on a 3G network, or all these other things. So don't fear asynchronous or events, and just think about when there is a sensible handover, and when does that next process need to start? Is it immediately, or is it nearly immediately, or is it in 24 hours, or whatever it might be? So I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this interesting. And thank you very much for watching.